My parents gave away the house I bought for them to my sister, so I stopped paying the mortgage, and the bank auctioned it off. I'm a 28-year-old man who has been paying the mortgage on a house I purchased for my parents, only to discover they gave it away to my 25-year-old sister without even informing me. I've always been aware that my parents favored my sister over me, but I never thought their bias would go to such extremes. Their affection for my sister, Perry, has always been overwhelming, while I've often felt like an afterthought in their eyes. As the eldest of 2 siblings, I was burdened with high expectations from a young age. My parents emphasized responsibility and academic success for me, while Perry was treated like royalty. Well, not actual royalty since we didn't have much money, but she always seemed to get whatever she wanted. Unlike me, Perry faced no academic pressures. She was free to pursue her interests and hobbies, while I was expected to excel in my studies. My parents didn't try to hide their expectations either. They made it clear that my role was to secure a stable career and avoid failure at all costs. After I graduated high school, they used their savings and took out loans to send me to technical college. I suggested taking out a student loan instead, one that I could repay after securing a job, but my parents refused. They were against the idea because of the high interest rates, explaining that I would end up paying back far more than the principal. At the time, I was too young and inexperienced to fully grasp the financial implications of loans. I thought, if my parents said so, it must be correct. I was barely 18 at the time. Little did I know they were saving me from the burden of a loan only to exploit me later. Shortly after finishing college, I got a good job in the tech sector, exactly what they wanted from me. Without a doubt, they were proud of me, but I always felt like some kind of investment, as if they had poured resources into me expecting returns. They never missed an opportunity to remind me, "We sacrificed so much for you. Don't forget it. Don't forget your roots. Don't forget where you came from." At first, it seemed harmless. I thought they just wanted to keep me grounded, but over time, I realized it was emotional manipulation. Emotional blackmail is their specialty. Once I started working, the pressure increased. Every time I visited, my dad would hint that I shouldn't forget they used their savings to pay for my college, and that I needed to work hard to repay their sacrifices. I knew my parents needed a house. They'd been saving for many years but spent that money on my education. I remember just starting my career, not even a year into work, when I went home for vacation. While having dinner, my dad looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We did our part by paying for your education. Now it's your turn. You should start planning to buy a house for us soon. We can't keep renting forever, can we?" I felt a lump in my throat when he said that. I knew they expected me to buy them a house, but not so soon. I hadn't even been working a year. I was still sharing an apartment with 2 roommates because I couldn't afford one on my own, and my parents were already asking me for such a huge financial commitment. Like, what the hell? I protested. "Dad, I just started my job. I can't even afford my own apartment. How can you expect me to take on such a big financial burden?" He said he wasn't asking immediately, but was planting the idea in my head so I could plan and work hard toward it. My mom chimed in with a deceptively sweet voice. "We paid for your college. Without us, you wouldn't be where you are now. Think about it. How to repay us?" I didn't have the heart to argue. They weren't wrong. I was where I was because of their sacrifices. But sometimes their lectures were too much to bear, and I wanted to scream, "Who asked you to do this for me?" But I didn't have the courage to confront my parents. I kept a safe distance from them and only answered their calls when it was urgent. Visiting them was out of the question after that dinner conversation. I used work as an excuse to avoid them. However, the obligation to buy them a house lived rent-free in my mind. So, after 5 years of saving and working hard, I gave in. I bought my parents a house, a modest, lovely home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable. Everything seemed fine. I thought it was the least I could do for my parents after all they had done for me. I paid the mortgage for 3 years, even paying extra to clear it off sooner. I had other plans in life. I wanted to buy my own house, travel, start a family, etc. I couldn't carry this loan forever. After buying them the house, my parents stopped bothering me about how they helped me. They proudly showed it off to their friends and relatives, boasting that their investment had paid off. I didn't mind, but it didn't bridge the gap between us. I still kept my distance and didn't visit them often. 2 days ago, I decided to visit my parents after being swamped with work for months. I didn't tell them. I wanted to surprise them, but a surprise was waiting for me. When I arrived at the house, I saw Perry's car parked outside. I thought she was visiting and was happy at the idea of a family reunion. Perry had gotten married and moved out when my parents were still renting. It had been years since I last saw her, at her wedding. I knocked on the door and Perry answered in pajamas. I thought she was just visiting for a short time. We greeted each other and hugged, and then she asked, "What are you doing here?" I replied playfully, I could ask you the same thing. I walked into the house and asked, "Where are Mom and Dad?" She sat on the couch and casually replied, "Oh, they moved." I froze. "They moved? What do you mean they moved? This is their house." Perry shrugged like it was no big deal. "I guess they didn't tell you. Actually, they gave it to me. I live here now." It felt like the ground shifted beneath my feet. "They gave you the house? The house I've been paying for?" "Yeah," she said nonchalantly, as if it made perfect sense. "Mom and Dad said I needed it more. You know, I'm planning to have a baby soon and they thought I should have the house." I was stunned. I asked, "Where are they living now?" She replied, "They're renting an apartment across town," as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I left without saying another word, my head swirling with anger. I drove straight to their new apartment without caring about showing up unannounced. When my mom opened the door, I wasted no time and said, "What the hell is going on? Perry just told me you gave her the house I bought, the house I've been paying for. Care to explain?" My mom had the audacity to smile as if it was no big deal. "Calm down, sweetheart. Come in. We didn't think you'd be upset." I walked in, but didn't bother to sit down. I wanted answers. Somehow my voice rose. "You didn't think I'd be upset? You gave away the house I bought without even talking to me? How could you think it wasn't important for me to know?" My mom sighed as if I were the unreasonable one. "Well, we thought that since you're doing so well, you wouldn't mind. Perry is planning to have a baby now. Do you want your nieces or nephews to be born in a rented house and grow up in an unstable environment? Now that they have the house, they don't have to worry about rent. They can focus on other things, like their child's well-being." I exploded. "I don't care where my nieces and nephews are born and raised. It doesn't bother me if they live in a rented house. We lived in one. I still live in one. Besides, it's not my responsibility to think about them. That's Perry and her husband's problem. If they want stability, they should get better jobs." Hearing the commotion, my dad came out of the room and said, "What's all this noise about? She needs financial security. We had to give her the house. She didn't have the same opportunities as you. We didn't pay for her college, so she deserves this house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's the thing about parents. They can say anything and expect no pushback. I responded, "You didn't pay for her college because she never went to college. She dropped out of high school, remember?" They refused to understand the gravity of what they had done. They kept saying, "You're successful. You can buy another house." "Of course I will," I said, "but it will be for me, not for you." I didn't even know how to respond. I felt like my world was collapsing. I couldn't understand their logic. I simply walked out of their apartment in a fury. I checked into a hotel and have been staying here since. I really don't know what to do. I can't continue paying the mortgage after learning the truth, but dealing with the situation is a real challenge. I know my parents can't afford the mortgage, and there's no doubt my sister can't either. This drama happened on Friday, and today is Sunday. My flight back is on Tuesday. At first, I thought about booking an earlier flight and leaving immediately, but when I calmed down, I realized I had other things to do here. I wanted to check how much was left on the loan since I had been overpaying the mortgage every month. I thought I might be ahead on payments. Before my visit, I had asked my dad about the mortgage balance. He said he'd need to check with his bank manager. I texted him to meet me at the bank tomorrow to get more details about the outstanding balance. Although I don't want to continue paying the mortgage, I want to know the current status. Update 1. There's more to this story, and I'm literally shaking as I write this. We just returned from the bank, and what I found out left me devastated. The extra money I had been sending for the mortgage never made it to the bank. My father only paid the actual mortgage amount and used the extra money for his own expenses, specifically to pay rent for their apartment. I've been living so frugally all these years, well below my means, to save a little more and pay off the mortgage early. When the bank manager showed me the monthly deposits, I told him it must be a mistake because we had been paying almost 1 1/3 times the mortgage amount. I even opened my transaction history to show how much money I'd been sending my dad every month. Then my dad chimed in, "The manager's records are correct. We only paid the mortgage amount." At first I thought my dad was confused or didn't understand the situation, but then he grabbed my arm and said, "The records are accurate. Let's talk about this later." I felt another blow. I was dizzy, anticipating yet another betrayal. I sat in stunned silence while the meeting ended, during which the manager gave us details about the remaining mortgage balance and other options for consolidating loans, etc. I remained quiet. As soon as the manager left us alone, my dad pulled me aside and asked, "Why are we talking about the extra money? Did you send it specifically for the mortgage?" I replied angrily, "Of course. What else would I send extra money for? I told you the money was for the mortgage." What he said next left me dumbfounded. "I thought you sent it for our expenses. I used it to pay our rent." I just stared at him and then sat down, burying my head in my hands. What do I do with my parents now? My dad sat beside me and asked me not to make a scene, saying it wasn't a big deal. I exploded. Not a big deal? You forced me to buy you a house and then gave it to Perry without even informing me. Plus, you used the extra money I sent for the mortgage to fund your new apartment. Let me tell you, Dad, you're not the kind of person who stays silent and accepts being confronted by his child, especially in public. He snapped back. Don't you dare raise your voice at me. You didn't do us a favor by buying us the house. I spent all my savings to pay for your college. I don't have to explain what I do with that house. You sent the money and I paid the mortgage on time. What's the problem if I use the extra to cover our rent? It's not like we're asking for more. I was furious at his words. The extra was to pay off the mortgage early, not to finance your new apartment. I stormed out of the bank in a rage. As I walked down the street, I could hear my dad shouting my name, but I didn't look back. I kept walking until I reached the metro station. My mom called me 4 or 5 times and sent a text asking me to come home so we could sit down and discuss the issue. I didn't reply. I don't want to discuss anything. I've already made my decision, and I'm going to do what I think is right. I'm done with their toxicity. Update 2. Apologies for the spelling and grammar mistakes in my last update. I was shaking with anger. I later had to edit it to make it readable. I also didn't address some common questions I received in the comments, so let me do that now. Some people asked if my parents are Asian. No, we're not. Let me dispel that myth. Asians aren't the only community whose parents pressure their children to the extreme. I don't want to reveal my ethnicity, sorry. Another common question was, whose name was on the loan? Well, the loan was under my dad's name. I didn't co-sign it because I wanted to buy a car and maybe a house in the future, and being tied to this loan would have affected my ability to secure those loans. Now, I'm proud of that decision because it made executing my plan easier. Moving on to the update. Yesterday, I returned to my normal life. A month has passed, and I didn't send my dad the mortgage money. As expected, he tried to contact me on the first day of the month, only to find out that I had blocked him. Not just him, I blocked my mom, my sister, and her husband as well. I don't want any more drama in my life. I made my decision. I stopped paying the mortgage. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. If my parents wanted to give the house to Perry, fine. Let her handle the payments. Let her take responsibility. When my parents realized what I'd done, they lost their minds. I received some calls and voicemails from unknown numbers. Maybe they used their friends' phones, I don't know. The messages were something like, "You can't just stop paying. We don't have the money to cover the mortgage." I laughed to myself. Well, it's no longer my problem. I blocked those numbers too. But that wasn't all. 3 days later, I found my father at my doorstep when I came home from work. He was furious and said, "You can't just walk away like that. You owe us. We paid for your college. We made you who you are." I immediately replied, "I've already paid you back. Do you realize how much I've spent on that mortgage? It's more than what you paid for my college tuition. I don't owe you anything." He called me ungrateful, but I cut him off saying, "No, you can't guilt trip me anymore. I've done more than enough. I'm not going to pay for the house, the rent, or anything else. You made your choice. Now face the consequences. You treated me like an investment. Sent me to college expecting to milk me dry for life. I'm not an investment." I walked out of the hallway and got into my car. I didn't enter my apartment because I knew he'd follow me inside, and I wasn't ready for more drama. When I returned later that night, he was gone. My mother tried calling me several more times with new numbers, leaving desperate voice messages. Even Perry left me a long message from another number, saying she needed the house for her future family, and that I was being selfish for not helping. Selfish? Me? The one who's been paying for everything while she did nothing? I didn't give in to any of their manipulations. I'm done with them. I've cut ties completely. Update 3. The house was sold at auction, and Perry was forced to move out. As I mentioned earlier, Perry couldn't afford to pay the mortgage, and my parents were already financially strapped paying the rent for their apartment. They couldn't handle the mortgage, rent, and household expenses. When I stopped making payments, I knew this would happen. It was just a matter of time. After nearly a year, I learned the house had been sold. My parents did everything they could to save it, using their savings and liquidating their retirement funds, but they couldn't. Things also became tense between Perry and my parents during this time. When they were struggling to pay the mortgage, they asked Perry and her husband to contribute 50%, but she refused, saying the house was a gift to her and they should cover the full payment. That's when my parents realized the mistake they'd made, but by then it was too late. I think my parents did the right thing by letting the bank auction and sell the house, instead of continuing to pay the mortgage and letting Perry live there for free. The house was auctioned off, and my dad got back a significant amount of money, part of the down payment and monthly payments he had been making over the years. With that, he has more than enough to recover what he invested in me. I know it's my money, but I don't expect a penny from it. They're not going to give it back, and I have to let it go. At least now they can't claim they did me a favor by paying for my college tuition. I've repaid that favor with interest. I no longer feel guilty about cutting them out of my life. From what I've heard from my cousins and uncles, my parents have moved into a smaller apartment to reduce rental costs. They've also saved the money they received from the auction for their retirement. They've been telling everyone that they don't want to depend on me in their old age, and that they're working to secure themselves. They've also cut off all financial support to Perry and told her she has to fend for herself with her family. Yes, she tried to manipulate them again, saying they paid for my college and secured my future, so they were also obligated to secure hers. However, my parents have now returned to reality and aren't giving in to her demands. Well, good for them. Meanwhile, I've rented an apartment for myself. I'll finally have some privacy. I've also started saving to buy my own house, a place that will be mine and mine alone. It's not easy to walk away from family, but sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who exploit you the most. It took me a long time to realize this, but I don't regret my decision. Family or not, I deserve better than to be treated like a walking at the moment. Update 4. I've seen many people still asking questions, so let me clarify a few points before getting into what has happened recently. One of the most common questions has been how much my parents spent on my education and how much I spent on the mortgage for the house that was supposedly for them. Well, although I don't have exact figures, I can say that my education cost around $40,000. As for the mortgage, including the extra payments I sent to pay it off early, which my parents used to pay the rent for their apartment, I've paid about $52,000. As you can see, I've repaid the money and then some. I no longer feel I owe them anything. Some people have also asked about Perry. I want to clarify that she hasn't been left homeless, as some have suggested. She and her husband are living with her in-laws, so no, I'm not that horrible brother who left his poor sister without a roof. Besides, the house was never for her but for my parents. Perry and her husband could have taken over the mortgage payments, but as always, they didn't want to make the effort. The house was under my parents' name, and they were the ones who decided to gift it to Perry, so it was up to them to pay the rest. There was nothing I could do, nor anything I wanted to do for them. Now, the real update, my father came back. Apparently, he had money for a plane ticket to visit me. Well, let me correct myself, to demand something, not visit me. He came to ask me for more money. This time, he wants me to buy them another house. After everything that happened with the first house, the one they gave to their favorite daughter, they now expect me to buy them another one. He told me they deserve a house because they've made so many sacrifices for us, their children. It always comes back to the college tuition, reminding me of the big sacrifice they made to pay for my education, which, of course, is brought up in every conversation with my parents. And of course, he mentioned that they gave a house to their daughter, as if that wasn't the height of irony, considering the house was originally for them, not for her. According to him, they've already fulfilled their role as parents, so now they deserve their own house. I made it very clear that I'm not going to buy them another house under any circumstances. The money I've been saving is for me to buy my own house, not to bail them out again. I told them their chance to have a house was wasted when they decided to give it to Perry, and they should go ask her to buy them one now. I'd love to see what kind of response they'd get from her. My father stayed in the city for a couple of days and asked me to think about it and talk it over again. However, I had a work trip during those days, so I didn't speak to him again. Or rather, he couldn't reach me because he had no way to contact me. I blocked his numbers so he couldn't find me. When I returned to my apartment after the trip, he was gone, and I haven't heard anything from him since. As for me, I'm close to reaching my savings goal for the down payment on a house. I'm so close, and if everything goes well, the next time I write here, I hope to announce that I'll finally own a modest place to call my own. Update 5. Here I am, to tell you that I've been able to buy my own house. I still have work to do, like buying furniture and such, but I finally have a roof over my head that I can call my own. I've read all your comments and advice, and as many of you suggested, I haven't told anyone. I haven't even posted it on social media. I've only shared it with a small group of friends who have no connection to my parents or family. They're friends I've made in this city, so there's no way the news could reach my parents. I don't want to risk them doing what you've read in other posts, like asking me to give the house to my pregnant sister or something like that. So I'm being extremely careful with this information. I don't want to find myself in a mama bear situation where they demand the house for the sake of the family. I joke that I'd love to have an electric fence around the house to keep entitled parents away, but honestly, I've learned from Reddit that the best thing is to keep this information secret, at least until I can establish solid boundaries. Now, instead of asking for advice on how to deal with parents like this, I'm here to ask for advice on something more enjoyable: decorating my new home. If there's one thing I'm not good at, it's decorating. When I lived with roommates, someone else always took care of that. And when I moved to a rented place, it was already furnished, so I never had to worry much. But now that I have this empty space, a blank canvas, I feel a bit intimidated. I don't want to ruin it and turn it into a place without personality or with bad taste.